It was a cold January night in East Point, Michigan. 17-year-old Zion Foster kissed her mom goodbye and said she was going to see her cousin. That was the last time anyone ever saw her alive. Hours later, her phone went silent. Her messages stopped. And by morning, a mother's instinct had already turned into dread. When police were called, they hesitated, treating it like just another teen who'd probably run off. But Zion didn't run. She didn't hide. Because before dawn broke, something irreversible had already happened. Weeks later, her cousin would admit to a horrifying secret, and a decision that still haunts an entire city. Before we begin, take a moment. Like this video, share it, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Because stories like Zion's remind us that sometimes the danger isn't a stranger, it's family. Zion Foster was 17 years old, bright, ambitious, and deeply loved. She lived with her mother, Kimberly Foster, in East Point, a close-knit suburb bordering Detroit's northeast edge. Friends described her as polite, funny, and devoted to her younger siblings. She was finishing her junior year, thinking about graduation and life beyond high school. She wasn't a troubled teen, wasn't known to run off, and had no history of skipping out on family. She was simply a normal teenager living in Metro Detroit, posting on social media, helping her mom, dreaming about adulthood, college, and independence. January 2022 should have been the start of a new year filled with possibility. Instead, it became a month her family would relive in nightmares. On the evening of January 4th, 2022, Zion told her mother she was heading out to see her cousin, Jalen Brazier. Kimberly trusted him, he was family. Nothing about that plan raised concern. Zion got ready, said goodbye, and stepped outside into the cold Michigan night. Surveillance cameras near the area later confirmed she left home around that time, and that was the last verified sighting of her alive. Her mother expected her back later that evening. When Zion's phone stopped ringing and hours passed without a message, Kimberly's concern grew into panic. She called and texted repeatedly. Nothing. The phone went straight to voicemail. Something was wrong, and she knew it. That same night, Kimberly Foster contacted East Point police to report her daughter missing. She explained Zion wasn't the type to disappear, that she had no reason to leave. But the reaction she received was slow and uncertain. Investigators later admitted that at first, Zion's case wasn't treated as an emergency. Like too many missing black teenage girls in America, her disappearance didn't trigger an Amber Alert or an immediate media push. Authorities wanted to wait and see whether she would turn up. But Zion's mother refused to wait. She called local news, contacted friends, printed flyers, and demanded attention. Her pleas soon spread across Detroit area social media. Still, no one knew where Zion was, and her cousin wasn't saying much. In those early days, Jalen Brazier, Zion's older cousin, told investigators he hadn't seen her. His statements shifted, creating contradictions that immediately caught police attention. Days turned into weeks, and under pressure from questioning, Brazier changed his story. He finally admitted he had been with Zion the night she vanished. He claimed they were smoking marijuana together when she suddenly became unresponsive. Instead of calling 911, he said he panicked. He told detectives he believed she was dead, placed her body in a dumpster in Detroit, and left. It was a stunning confession, but one riddled with holes. There was no evidence Zion had overdosed, no toxicology, no witness, and no physical proof. And with no body, police had little to verify or refute his version of events. Kimberly Foster's life collapsed overnight. The cousin her daughter trusted was now at the center of a criminal investigation. She sat through every interview, every news briefing, every agonizing day without answers. Her daughter had vanished, and the only person who might know where she was couldn't even give her a proper goodbye. Kimberly's words to the media were raw and unforgettable. "I just want to bring my baby home. That's all I want." Her grief fueled a movement. She began organizing public searches, holding vigils, and pushing authorities to look deeper, not to stop until Zion was found. Once Brazier's admission surfaced, the Detroit Police Department and the Macomb County Prosecutor's Office began treating the case as a potential homicide. Based on his statement, investigators identified the Green for Life environmental landfill as the most likely site where the dumpster's contents were taken. In February 2022, teams of officers, cadaver dogs, and volunteers began the nearly impossible task of sifting through a mountain of frozen garbage and compacted debris, hoping to find even the smallest trace of Zion. The landfill stretched for acres. Each truckload weighed tons. Searchers described the smell, the cold, the emotional weight of knowing a child's body might be hidden beneath. Despite months of effort, no human remains were recovered. Still, detectives maintained that Brazier's account placed Zion in that dumpster, and that finding her might never be possible. As coverage spread across Detroit television and national outlets, questions arose about how Zion's case was handled from the start. Why hadn't an Amber Alert been issued? Why did it take weeks to secure Brazier's truthful statement? And how could a confession that admitted disposal of a body lead only to minor charges? Community activists pointed out a painful pattern. Missing Black women and girls often receive less urgency, fewer resources, and delayed responses compared with white victims. Zion's case became a rallying cry for change. Her mother's persistence forced local agencies to reevaluate how they classify missing teen reports, pushing for immediate escalations in similar cases moving forward. Prosecutors charged Jalen Brazier not with murder or manslaughter, but with lying to police and tampering with evidence. The absence of a body limited what could be proven. Without physical evidence, a homicide case could collapse in court. In 2022, Brazier pleaded guilty to lying to investigators and received a sentence of 23 months to 4 years in prison. To Zion's family, it felt like a slap in the face. He served less than 2 years before being released in 2024. The man who admitted to discarding Zion's body walked free, while her mother continued searching landfills, praying for closure. The unanswered questions still cut deep. If Zion really collapsed from smoking, why didn't he call 911? Why hide her body if it was an accident? Why lie for so long, knowing every minute mattered to the search? These questions hang heavy over every vigil, every news update, every post that bears her smiling face. The silence surrounding that night feels as cold as the Michigan air she walked into, and as endless as the landfill where police believe she may rest. Kimberly Foster has become a voice for other families facing the same uphill battle. She's spoken at rallies, on television, and online about how missing person protocols must change. She keeps Zion's name alive through advocacy, community events, and social media campaigns that demand accountability. Her message is always the same: don't stop searching, don't stop caring. My daughter's life mattered. Her strength reminds the world that behind every missing person headline is a family that never stops fighting. Zion Foster's disappearance wasn't a mystery lost in the woods or a stranger abduction case that faded from news cycles. It happened within a family, inside a city, in plain sight, and still justice feels out of reach. A 17-year-old girl left home to see someone she trusted. Hours later, she was gone. No body, no clear answers, just a mother's unending heartbreak. As the investigation continues and public pressure mounts, one truth remains undeniable. Zion Foster should have been protected, believed, and found. If your child disappeared and the only person who could help lied, how far would you go to bring the truth to light? From the moment Zion Foster vanished, one person had answers, and he chose silence. Jalen Brazier, her older cousin, stood at the edge of a mystery that was only beginning to unfold. But instead of helping the search, he misled it. And by the time the truth surfaced, precious time had already been lost. When Zion's mother, Kimberly Foster, told police her daughter had gone to see her cousin and never returned, officers quickly turned their attention to Jalen. He was older than Zion, in his early 20s, and she trusted him enough to leave the house that cold January night. But when investigators approached him for questioning, he denied everything. He told them he hadn't seen Zion that night. In fact, he claimed it had been months since they were last together. There was no visit, no hangout, no contact. As far as he was concerned, he didn't know where she was, or what had happened. But that story didn't hold. Officers seized both his phone and Zion's, hoping digital trails would reveal more than words. What they found contradicted everything Jalen had claimed. There were hundreds of text messages between the two, not just from months ago, but from the very days leading up to January 4th. In one message, Zion even told him she was on her way. Their phones had connected to the same towers. Data proved they were in the same area that night. The more detectives dug, the more inconsistencies surfaced. Surveillance footage in the neighborhood didn't show Zion going anywhere else. There were no signs she had taken another route or gone to meet someone else. Her phone stopped pinging hours after she left home. A digital silence that suggested something irreversible had occurred. Meanwhile, Jalen's own phone history raised red flags. Investigators discovered Google searches that seemed disturbingly specific. Are trash trucks also compactors? How police track missing people's phones? How long it takes for garbage to reach landfills? These were not questions of someone hoping to find a missing cousin. They were questions rooted in panic or worse. 15 days passed. 15 days of Kimberly Foster making phone calls, holding flyers, praying for a call that never came. 15 days of waiting for Jalen Brazier to do the right thing. And then, on January 19, 2022, he spoke. Sitting across from two detectives in a small room, Jalen finally admitted what they had long suspected. Yes, he had seen Zion that night. She had come over to his house in Detroit. They had been together alone for about an hour. He said they smoked marijuana, and then he claimed something went terribly wrong. According to him, Zion suddenly collapsed. He described her breathing as shallow, her heartbeat faint. He waited, hoping she would recover, but she didn't move. There was no sign of consciousness. And instead of calling 911 or rushing her to a hospital, Jalen panicked. In his confession, which was later played in court, he told detectives that he believed Zion had died. So he wrapped her up, the details of how and with what were never fully confirmed, and placed her body into a dumpster behind an abandoned building in Highland Park, a city within Detroit. He said the dumpster lids were already open. He didn't check again. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't tell her mother. He simply walked away. That was his version. A sudden collapse, a tragic accident, and a terrible mistake made out of fear. But to investigators and to Zion's family, it didn't add up. Marijuana, even in high doses, is not known to cause sudden death in young, healthy people. Zion had no known heart conditions, and though she did suffer from asthma, medical experts later testified that her records didn't suggest a likely fatal episode that matched Jalen's timeline. Even if she had shown signs of distress, the decision not to seek help, not to dial 3 numbers, was unforgivable. And why lie for 2 weeks? Why allow a family to search desperately for a child he knew was already gone? Why mislead police, send them down false paths, and delay the search that might have recovered her body sooner? There was also the matter of the dumpster. When Jalen led investigators to the exact location, it was already too late. The contents had been collected, compacted, and taken to a massive landfill in Macomb County. By the time law enforcement mobilized to begin the search, the area in question spanned hundreds of tons of garbage. Bulldozers and cadaver dogs were brought in. Specialized crews worked in freezing temperatures, sifting through endless debris for any trace of Zion. But she was never found. Even then, Jalen's story kept changing. In one version, he said she had only passed out. In another, he thought he felt her heart stop. When pressed about why he didn't call for help, he said he panicked. When asked if he tried to wake her, he gave vague answers. When asked why he used a dumpster, he shrugged. There was no remorse, Kimberly later said, only excuses. Detectives also uncovered more disturbing content on Jalen's devices. Alongside the incriminating search history were videos and pornographic material, some involving non-consensual scenarios. One video included the keyword cousin. While prosecutors couldn't use this as evidence of a motive, they presented it during trial to establish character and behavior patterns. Then there was the deleted data. Investigators discovered that Ring camera footage from Jalen's home was missing for the night of January 4th. His phone logs showed signs of messages being erased. His internet history had been partially wiped. It wasn't just what he said. It was what he tried to erase that made them suspicious. Despite the confession, Many believe Jalen Brazier wasn't telling the full truth. The theory that Zion simply collapsed remains controversial. No toxicology, no body, no witness, and too many unanswered questions. Still, in May 2024, after a long-delayed trial, a jury found him guilty of second-degree murder and tampering with evidence. At sentencing, the courtroom fell into silence as the judge handed down the maximum: 38 to 90 years for murder, and another 5 to 10 years for tampering, to be served consecutively. He showed little emotion. Zion's family wept. Even with the conviction, her body remains missing. Kimberly Foster still hasn't been able to bury her daughter. There is no grave, no final goodbye, just an empty chair at the dinner table and a name that echoes through community vigils and courtroom transcripts. So what really happened in that house on January 4th? Was it an accident like Jalen claims? Did she simply stop breathing and he panicked? Or did something darker take place? The lies, the delay, the searches, the silence. They all tell their own story, and none of them bring Zion home. You've heard his version. Now ask yourself this: do you believe Jalen Brazier's confession was the full truth, or a carefully crafted lie to avoid a murder charge? From the moment Jalen Brazier admitted placing Zion Foster's body in a dumpster, investigators faced their most daunting task: tracing what happened after that dumpster was emptied. They believed the contents were hauled off to a landfill in Macomb County. And so began what would become one of the most grueling, heartbreaking searches in recent Michigan history. In May 2022, Detroit police, working with county and state agencies, initiated a massive landfill excavation at Pine Tree Acres in Lenox Township. WXYZ 7 News Detroit +2 Bridge Detroit +2 Day after day. Crews suited up in hazmat gear, respirators, gloves, and boots, descending into heaps of compacted trash that bore the weight of countless tons. Bridge Detroit +2 WXYZ 7 News Detroit +2 They dug through debris, layer by layer, sometimes reaching depths of 50 feet below the surface. https://www.kplctv.com +3 Bridge Detroit +3 WXYZ 7 News Detroit +3. The conditions were brutal. The summer heat in Lenox Township sweltered. The stench of rotting waste set in. Volunteers and officers alike described the emotional weight of knowing a young girl's remains might be hidden somewhere in that giant grave. Bridge Detroit +1 thousands of tons of material were sifted through, treated with care, and cross-checked against thousands of missing person indices. Bridge Detroit +2 WXYZ 7 News Detroit +2. At one point, law enforcement officials described removing as much as 7,500 tons of trash by hand, in an attempt to leave no stone unturned. Bridge Detroit over months, volunteers from the Detroit Public Safety Foundation and the wider community joined the effort, some donating equipment, others logistical support, and many contributing financially to sustain the search. WXYZ 7 News Detroit +1 news coverage reported that hundreds of thousands of dollars had been committed to keep the operation going. WXYZ 7 News Detroit. Still, even with all that manpower and investment, no human remains were located. In October 2022, Detroit police publicly announced they were halting the landfill search. WXYZ 7 News Detroit +2 Detroit News +2 Chief James White and other leaders stated the search was ended not because they believed Zion couldn't be found, but because they had exhausted their leads and resources in that location. Bridge Detroit +2 Detroit News +2. That decision did not come lightly. Officials said they had gone as far as they could in that area, digging through debris, tracking truck routes, exploring every tip, but at that point, prolonging the excavation could risk contaminating potential evidence or drawing resources away from other lines of investigation. Detroit News +1. In the wake of the failed search, the public and media began to ask hard questions. How could a body vanish into tons of refuse and leave no trace? Was the landfill location correct? Did Brazier's confession misstate or omit critical details? Could Zion's remains be somewhere else entirely, discarded again or hidden before landfill transfer? Critics also asked whether the money and effort spent on dozens of laborers, mechanical equipment, cadaver dogs, and specialized teams would have been better used elsewhere, tracking phone data, re-examining witness leads, or reopening older avenues. Some argued the emotional cost on Zion's family and the volunteers was too high. Others said ceasing the search risked signaling that her case was no longer a priority. Law enforcement officials defended their decision. They stressed that searches of landfills are among the most difficult and expensive undertakings in missing person cases. When a location is vast, with shifting contents and compacted loads, even perfect evidence might be destroyed or rendered unrecoverable. To continue indefinitely without new leads could also mean diminishing returns. But the halting of the landfill operation did not mean law enforcement gave up. Investigation continued, evidence was re-examined, and alternate lines were pursued. Detroit News +2 Bridge Detroit +2. Over time, prosecutors would go on to file murder charges against Brazier despite the absence of a body, showing that they believed the rest of the case. Confession, digital evidence, inconsistencies was strong enough. CBS News in 2024. Brazier was convicted of second-degree murder even though Zion's physical remains were never recovered. AP News +2 https://www.kplctv.com +2 That outcome cemented a sad but potent truth. In modern investigations, a body is ideal, but not always necessary for accountability. Yet the public still wonders. Was there more to the story? Did the landfill search fail because the body wasn't there all along? Or was it removed, relocated, or otherwise concealed in a way that made it invisible? This leads to a final, haunting question for you to carry forward. Should police continue costly searches when no body is found, if the chances of recovery are low? If you believe in justice for Zion, like this video, share her story, and subscribe for more voices that deserve to be heard, and hit the notification bell. When we say her name, we keep her memory alive and remind the world that every child matters. For weeks, Zion Foster's family waited for justice to catch up to the one person who knew what had happened. Jalen Brazier confessed to discarding her body, led investigators to a dumpster, and admitted that he had lied. But when he was finally charged, the words her family expected, murder, homicide, abuse of a corpse, weren't there. Instead, the first official charge was simple: lying to police. Felt like a gut punch, a confession without a consequence, a body that still hadn't been found, and a legal system that seemed to hesitate when a young black girl vanished into silence. When Brazier stood before the court, he didn't deny that he'd misled investigators. He accepted a plea deal, not for taking Zion's life, but for obstructing the investigation into it. He told the judge that Zion had just collapsed. One minute she was fine, he claimed. The next, she was gone. There was no violence, no argument, no explanation. Just sudden death. And instead of calling for help, he panicked. That was his word. Panic. He wrapped her body, carried her to a dumpster, and walked away. In March 2022, Brazier was sentenced to 23 months to 4 years in prison. It was more than the recommended sentence for that charge, but it was nowhere near what the family expected. The courtroom was silent when the judge read the decision. Outside, Zion's mother held her head high, but her voice trembled. She didn't believe a word of his story. Not the way she knew her daughter. Not the way Jalen had lied for weeks. But the true heartbreak came nearly a year later, when Brazier was quietly released. He had served less than 10 months. Thanks to a Michigan corrections program designed to reduce sentences through behavioral compliance and boot camp completion, Brazier walked out of prison in early January 2023. No murder charge, no trial, just time served for a lie. Zion's mother said it out loud. He didn't even get the full 23 months. Her words burned with grief and disbelief. Her daughter was still missing. Her body had never been recovered. And the man who had admitted to dumping her like trash was free to go home. It made headlines, but only for a day. In a world that moves fast and forgets fast, Zion's name risked fading. But her family refused to let it. They rallied. They marched. They spoke at churches, on local television, to every journalist who would listen. They didn't just want accountability for Jalen. They wanted change for Zion, and for the dozens of other missing black girls who never made it to primetime news. Their message was loud and unwavering. Zion mattered. She still mattered. Still, the legal process dragged. For months, it seemed as though prosecutors were hesitating. Without a body, how do you prove a crime? How do you file murder charges when the medical examiner can't declare a cause of death? How do you stand in front of a jury and ask for a conviction when you can't even bring the victim into the courtroom? But behind the scenes, the pieces were moving. Investigators reanalyzed Jalen's phone. They found disturbing internet searches. Phrases like, "Are trash trucks also compactors? Can you be charged for murder without a body?" They recovered messages, browser histories, and even videos. Some of them were deeply unsettling. Pornographic clips with the word cousin in the title. Rape-themed content. Behavior patterns that prosecutors would later describe as evidence of both motive and mindset. They also uncovered inconsistencies in his statements. In one interview, Jalen said Zion passed out. In another, he said she was already gone. He told detectives he had waited for her to wake up. Then he said he didn't wait at all. The more he talked, the less it made sense. All of it built pressure enough eventually to reopen the door for a new set of charges. In June 2023, a year and a half after Zion disappeared, the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office filed formal charges of second-degree murder against Jalen Brazier. It was the moment Zion's family had been waiting for. Her mother called it a step forward, not closure, but progress. The man who threw her child away would finally face a jury. The trial began in May 2024. Over several days, prosecutors brought forward 32 witnesses, detectives, experts, digital analysts, and medical professionals. They played the tapes of Jalen's confession. They walked the jury through the Google searches. They presented the phone data, the missing Ring camera footage, and the text logs that placed Zion in his home the night she vanished. And they showed the gaps, the things that didn't fit. Zion was a healthy 17-year-old girl. She had asthma, yes, but her medical records didn't point to a fatal condition. There was no evidence of a seizure, no known allergies, nothing to suggest she would simply collapse. The claim that she died after smoking marijuana didn't line up with medical science. It didn't line up with how she lived. It didn't line up with the truth. The defense pushed back hard. They argued that the case was built on theories, not facts. That the lack of a body meant reasonable doubt remained. That Jalen never intended harm, and that his panic was human, not criminal. But the jury didn't buy it. After less than 30 minutes of deliberation, they returned their verdict. Guilty on both counts. Second-degree murder. Tampering with evidence. When the verdict was read, the courtroom held its breath. Zion's mother stood with tears in her eyes. Her daughter still wasn't home. But for the first time, someone was finally being held responsible for her disappearance. Not just for lying about it. Sentencing came in June. The courtroom was quiet when the judge handed down his decision. 38 to 90 years. A sentence that spoke not just to the crime, but to the cover-up, the silence, the cruelty of discarding a child and walking away. Jalen Brazier showed little emotion. He offered a short statement, saying he accepted responsibility, though he stopped short of admitting guilt for her death. The judge didn't flinch. He made it clear. The court saw through the lies. Outside, Zion's parents held each other. They had waited 2.5 years for that moment. It didn't bring Zion back, but it brought the beginning of justice. And still, there is no grave, no casket, no marker with her name, only a mother's hope that one day, someone will find her child. Because that's the part justice hasn't touched. The part that haunts the city of East Point, that lingers in every hallway Zion once walked through, that echoes in the silence of her room. She is still out there, somewhere. So now the question becomes, was this enough? Can a conviction fill the hole where a body should be? Can 90 years undo the 10 months he walked free? Can a jury's verdict replace the sound of her voice? Or is justice still waiting to be found? At the bottom of a landfill, in a cold case file, or in the voice of every mother who's still searching. If you believe Zion deserves more, if you believe her name should be heard far beyond Michigan, share this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Say her name, tell her story, because silence is not justice, and she did not deserve to be forgotten. In every photo of Zion Foster that circles the internet, the selfies, the birthday clips, the smiling videos. There's a quiet, aching truth behind them. That truth has a name. Kimberly D. Foster. She's Zion's mother. And from the moment her daughter disappeared, she refused to sit still. Kimberly knew something was wrong from the beginning. When Zion didn't return home that night in January 2022, she didn't wait 24 hours. She didn't chalk it up to teenage rebellion. She knew her daughter. Zion didn't just vanish without a word. And Kimberly made sure the police heard her. Loudly, immediately, but what she got back, at least in those early hours, was hesitation. Dismissiveness. A slow start when time was everything. And so, she became the loudest voice in the room. While officers worked their timeline and canvassed neighborhoods, Kimberly canvassed the internet. She went to every news station. She printed flyers. She posted updates and videos online. She didn't let people forget. Not for a day. It was Kimberly who kept Zion's case in the headlines long after many would have turned the page. She stood with posters in front of police departments. She organized candlelight vigils in East Point and Detroit. She gave every reporter who called her story, not just Zion's story, but the story of how families like hers are often left to fight alone. She said it plainly, they moved too slowly, and when Brazier was finally arrested, not for murder, but for lying to police, she didn't hold back. She told local media, he didn't even get the full 23 months. Her voice was firm, but you could hear the weight behind it. She wasn't just angry, she was exhausted, because that's what it means to be the mother of a missing black girl in America. It means shouting into silence. It means waking up every day wondering if anyone is still looking, still caring, still helping. As months passed, Kimberly refused to fade into the background. She remained vocal even after the landfill search failed to recover Zion's body. When the media moved on, she didn't. She pushed the narrative forward, showing up to every court date, sharing emotional testimony, calling out prosecutors, and demanding justice. She didn't just become an advocate for Zion. She became a symbol for so many others. A voice for black mothers across the country whose daughters are missing, murdered, or misclassified. For those who never got Amber Alerts, who never made national news, who were told to wait, to be patient, while the clock ran out on their child's life. In May 2024, when Jalen Brazier was finally convicted of second-degree murder and tampering with evidence, Kimberly stood tall outside the courtroom. The media swarmed her, but she didn't flinch. Her words cut straight through. You thought she didn't matter. You thought she was just another girl. But she wasn't. She was loved. She was fought for. She still is. That statement echoed far beyond the courthouse. It wasn't just about Zion anymore. It was about the many girls like her, girls who disappear and are dismissed, who vanish without headlines, whose stories stay locked in family grief instead of public outrage. Kimberly's voice became a reminder of what too many already knew. That race, class, and geography still shape which missing persons cases get national attention, and which don't. Statistically, black girls make up a disproportionately high number of missing teens in the United States. Yet studies have shown their cases are underreported in national media. Less coverage, fewer resources, fewer calls to action, and more often than not, a narrative that assumes they ran away instead of being taken, hurt, or killed. Kimberly refused to let that happen to Zion. Even when the legal system seemed unsure, even when prosecutors waited to file homicide charges due to the missing body, Kimberly kept the pressure on. She spoke in interviews about how the justice system was designed to slow-walk cases like her daughter's. She said plainly what many mothers feel but are afraid to say, that if Zion had looked different, had lived in a different zip code, maybe her story would have moved faster. And when Jalen was sentenced to 38 to 90 years, Kimberly was there, watching, listening. She didn't celebrate. There was no joy in it, only resolve. Zion still hadn't been found. There was no grave, no resting place, just questions. But the sentence mattered, because it told the world that Zion mattered. It was, as Kimberly called it, not closure, but justice. And for the first time in 2.5 years, she felt seen. Even now, she hasn't stopped. She still speaks out online, in churches, at memorials, on live streams. She talks about Zion not just as a daughter lost, but as a life that deserved protection, urgency, dignity. Because justice isn't just about courts. It's about visibility. It's about how we choose whose stories get told, and how we respond when silence is louder than answers. So let's bring the question to you. Why do you think cases involving black girls so often get less media attention? Ask yourself, if Zion Foster had been anyone else's daughter, if her skin were lighter, her name more familiar, would we have known her story sooner? Would the landfill search have lasted longer? Would charges have come faster? That's what Kimberly is fighting for, not just for justice for Zion, but for change. If you believe in justice for Zion, like this video, share her story, and subscribe for more voices that deserve to be heard, and hit the notification bell. When we say her name, we keep her memory alive and remind the world that every child matters. Zion Foster's face became a symbol, not because she asked to be one, but because she was missing, and because the system meant to protect her didn't respond fast enough. From the moment she disappeared, every delay, every misstep, every hesitation became part of something much bigger than just her story. Her family knew it. Her mother, Kimberly, could feel it. The slow police response, the long wait for a landfill search, the silence from national media, the refusal to issue an Amber Alert, and eventually the early release of the one man who admitted he discarded her body. It all added up to one terrible truth: the system had failed her. Zion wasn't just a 17-year-old girl from East Point, Michigan. She was a daughter, a sister, a student. But to the wider world, her name didn't carry urgency. Her disappearance didn't generate breaking news. There was no hour-by-hour coverage. No panel of experts on prime time. No viral hashtags within the first 48 hours. That silence is familiar to thousands of families across the country. Families of black and brown girls who vanish and watch their cases receive only a fraction of the attention others do. According to national statistics, black girls make up a disproportionately high percentage of missing teens in the United States. In some states, that number rises as high as 40%, even though black children make up only about 14 to 15% of the national child population. Despite that, their cases are often classified as runaways, not endangered. The media rarely covers them with the same intensity. Law enforcement response times lag. Amber Alerts are more difficult to trigger because they require specific circumstances, like confirmed abductions or known vehicle descriptions. And in too many instances, those technicalities become excuses. In Zion's case, it took 6 full days before her name was even entered into the East Point Police Department's official public notices. By then, she had already been gone. Her phone had gone dark. Her cousin had already lied to investigators. And somewhere, her body had already been discarded. No Amber Alert was ever issued. Authorities later explained that the case didn't meet the exact legal criteria. There was no immediate proof of abduction, no vehicle, no confirmed danger. But Zion's family argued that those rules are applied unevenly. They asked a haunting question. If Zion had been a white girl from a more affluent part of town, would the alert have gone out? And it's not just a rhetorical question. The disparities in how missing persons cases are handled, based on race, age, location, and perceived innocence, have been studied, published, and debated for years. Media watchdogs have coined the term missing white woman syndrome to describe how some victims receive wall-to-wall news coverage, while others, particularly black and indigenous girls, fade without a headline. In Zion's case, the media coverage remained mostly local for months. While her mother gave interviews to anyone who would listen, the story took too long to reach national platforms. Social media helped, but even there, traction lagged behind cases that fit a more familiar narrative. And so Kimberly Foster did what so many mothers have had to do. She made noise. She demanded cameras. She walked the streets with flyers. She organized vigils and held public press conferences. She spoke out not just about her daughter, but about the entire system that allowed her daughter's story to slip between the cracks. She joined advocacy groups and aligned with other families of missing black girls. Together, they pushed for reform, changes in how Amber Alerts are issued, how missing person cases are prioritized, how the media covers disappearances, and how law enforcement agencies can be held accountable for delays. Kimberly's voice became one of the loudest in a growing movement. When the landfill search for Zion's body began in May 2022, it brought renewed hope. For months, police and volunteers sifted through over 7,000 tons of debris in the sweltering Michigan heat. They did everything they could, but they found nothing. By October, the search was called off. Officially, it was explained as a necessary end after exhausting resources and avenues. But for Zion's family, it felt like another door closed too soon. Even after a confession, even after a mapped location, even after all the digging, there was still no body, still no resting place, still no resolution. And through it all, Kimberly kept speaking. She spoke about how the system treats black girls as disposable, about how assumptions that they've run away, that they'll come back, delay the most important hours in an investigation, about how if Zion had received the same urgency, the same spotlight, the same determination from authorities as other high-profile cases, maybe her story would have ended differently. She asked again and again, how many black girls have to vanish before the country pays attention? The truth is hard to hear, but impossible to ignore. Across America, families of missing girls of color are doing the same work Kimberly is doing. They're organizing their own searches, running their own social media pages, funding their own billboards, holding community meetings, and most of all, carrying a grief that's worsened by the feeling that the world simply doesn't care as much. That grief is heavy, but the movement growing from it is powerful. There are now task forces, nonprofits, and policy coalitions aimed at correcting these disparities. Some are calling for expanded Amber Alert criteria. Others demand that runaway designations be used less freely, and only after initial investigations rule out foul play. Several groups are working to create media equity standards, so that coverage decisions are made with fairness in mind, not assumptions about class or race. Kimberly has become a voice in those spaces. She continues to speak not just for Zion, but for every girl who hasn't come home, and every mother who can't rest until the world sees their child the way she saw hers. Even after Jalen Brazier was convicted and sentenced to 38 to 90 years in prison, the pain didn't end. Zion still hasn't been found. Her mother still hasn't held a funeral. And the question still lingers, what more could have been done if the system had acted sooner? That's the part that haunts so many families, the what-ifs, the days lost, the procedures delayed, the moments when urgency might have changed everything. So now it's your turn to consider it. What reforms would help prevent stories like Zion's from being overlooked? What would it take to build a system that searches for every child with the same intensity? That believes every mother the first time she says, "My daughter wouldn't just disappear?" That tells every black girl, your life matters, your name matters, and we're not going to wait until it's too late to show it. If you believe Zion deserves that kind of justice, and that no other child should fall through the cracks, share this video, say her name, and carry this story forward, because the system failed her. But we don't have to. From the moment Jalen Brazier admitted he put Zion Foster's body in a dumpster, the world's attention shifted to one grim question. Where did that dumpster go? Because every second, every landfill route, every trash compactor's movement might carry the answer. Brazier's recorded confession triggered a chain reaction. According to investigators, he told detectives Zion had collapsed while they were smoking marijuana, panicked, wrapped or carried her into a dumpster, and left her there. That bin, he said, was later emptied and hauled off to a landfill outside Detroit. For the first time, police had a location to pursue. It was the dumpster itself that would be the map to tracing her final journey. In May 2022, Detroit police, state agencies, and volunteers converged on Pine Tree Acres landfill in Lenox Township, Macomb County. The operation was massive. From the outset, search teams sorted through a site of staggering scale. Trucks bearing loose refuse, compactor loads, daily tipping totals, all became part of a forensic puzzle. Officials said they believed a specific route had carried the dumpster from Highland Park, through city haulers, and ultimately to that landfill. Turn zero search for. They began with removing roughly 20 feet of debris from a broad swath of the landfill. Teams broke the work into phases, focusing on zones where hauler logs, GPS data, compactor records, and waste management manifests suggested the dumpster might have landed. Search crews suited up in protective gear, hazmat suits, respirators, gloves, and descended into morass. Each day, they carved into mounds of decomposing trash, inch by inch. Search ended. Detroit News +2, Bridge Detroit +2. The logistics were brutal. It wasn't simply digging. Every bit of debris had to be treated as potential evidence. Metal fragments, clothing fibers, bone shards, tissue traces, all needed careful cataloging. Some days, over 50 volunteers worked same zones. At times, teams dug over 50 feet deep in sections. Bridge Detroit +1. During the effort, Detroit Police Chief James White publicly acknowledged the emotional and operational weight of the task. He told reporters the decision to continue would always balance evidence recovery with safety and diminishing returns. He said he dreaded the day when the search would have to be paused, if only because of how it would feel to tell a mother her child might never be recovered. Fox 2 Detroit. The deep summer heat didn't help. The landfill's odor, shifting ground, hazardous debris, and biological risk added to the mental strain. Searchers described the priority as ensuring accuracy even as exhaustion set in. Volunteers gave up weekends, community groups donated resources, local businesses and nonprofits supported food, water, equipment. Public safety foundations and in-kind sponsors added funds. Bridge Detroit reported that over $1 million in personnel costs and in-kind contributions were dedicated to the search. Bridge Detroit. At one point, an item of mail found among the waste renewed a flicker of hope. Investigators flagged it as Detroit origin mail, which they hoped might tie to Zion's route. But nothing conclusive emerged. Fox 2 Detroit +2 Detroit News +2. As weeks turned into months, the search stretched. It entered a second phase, redeploying fresh strategy and crews. But as depth increased, compaction and decomposition had already damaged surroundings. The earlier the body had been otherwise moved, the thinner the chance of recovery. Bridge Detroit +2 Detroit News +2. By mid-October 2022, after months of exhaustive work, Detroit police officially halted the landfill excavation. They stated they had turned every reasonable lead, and further digging risked destroying or contaminating potential evidence. Detroit News +2 Detroit News +2. The halt carried public weight. Many in Zion's family described it as abandonment. To them, stopping meant conceding that her body was lost forever. But police insisted the investigation was ongoing, exploring alternate lines and re-examining data. Detroit News +2 Bridge Detroit +2. In court, prosecutors later introduced the landfill searches scale to jurors. They emphasized that despite sifting through thousands of tons of debris in precisely defined sectors, no remains were found. That absence, they argued, made Brazier's confession more critical, if a body was truly supposed to be there. Bridge Detroit +1. Sergeant Shannon Jones of Detroit PD spoke about mapping trucks, compactor routes, and dumpster zones in trial testimony. She said that with truck GPS and dumpster pickup logs, when available, investigators tied certain vendor routes to zones of interest in the landfill. But she also admitted the challenge. After multiple pickups, blending of waste, and compactor compaction, the odds of recovery diminish rapidly. Bridge Detroit. Throughout the trial, prosecutors told jurors, "We sought to bring her home." That phrase echoed in testimonies, in arguments, in the rhetoric of burden, because a body unrecovered is a wound unresolved. Detroit News +1. For Kimberly Foster, the emotional toll of that prolonged search was immeasurable. She sat through briefings. She visited the search site. She begged for hope. In court, she often repeated what had become her refrain. "I just want to bring my baby home." It was less a demand than a prayer. Through every failed dig, through every negative result, she held on to it. She held on to Zion's name, her memory, her presence. Even after Brazier's 2024 conviction, second-degree murder and tampering with evidence, Zion's body remained missing. That haunting emptiness hung over sentences, courtroom emotion, and community discourse. It was the void that justice could not fill. AP News plus 3 AP News plus 3 AP News plus 3. During sentencing, prosecutors referenced the landfill search in justifying severity. They said the scale of dedication should not be ignored, that the state tried, but the evidence withheld itself. At the same time, critics and defense lawyers flagged the absence as a possible sign Odessa of misdirection, suppression, or unshared knowledge. The suspicion: Brazier's confession might omit crucial steps or hide deeper actions. AP News plus 2 AP News plus 2. Speculation circulates among legal analysts and observers. Did Brazier stage parts of the disposal process? Did he use alternate dumpsters? Did he redirect certain debris streams? Did he manipulate truck routes or hauler schedules? Did he earlier move the body before the dumpster at all? Each possibility becomes a phantom in a courtroom of shadows. Still, investigators keep the files open. Cold lead teams, digital reanalysis, hauler logs, compactor manifests all remain possible forks to revisit. Because in cases without a body, facts never fully rest. And so we return to the question you carry with you. Do you believe Brazier's story as he told it of panic and disposal, or do you think something darker occurred? That perhaps he concealed evidence, misled investigators, or masked more direct violence than the narrative suggests? Because in Zion Foster's disappearance, the missing body is not just an absence. It's a silence demanding answers. The landfill is quiet now. The machines are gone, the search tents folded, and the volunteers who once combed through mountains of trash have gone home. But for Zion Foster's family, there's no such thing as an ending. There's only the ache of something unfinished, a grief that refuses to rest. More than 2 years after that night in January 2022, when 17-year-old Zion left home to visit her cousin in East Point, Michigan, her body has never been found. The landfill search failed to recover her remains. Investigators concluded the trail ended somewhere inside Pine Tree Acres landfill in Macomb County. But what was left of her, where exactly she lies, or whether she even reached that place, those answers never came. And so her mother, Kimberly D. Foster, wakes up every morning knowing her daughter's body is somewhere out there, but not here, not home. In May 2024, after more than 2 years of questions and anguish, a Wayne County jury found Jalen Brazier, Zion's cousin, guilty of second-degree murder and tampering with evidence. Prosecutors said he killed her, disposed of her body, then lied to police to delay discovery. Even without a body, jurors were convinced. They listened to hours of confession recordings, phone data, and testimony showing he searched online for how police track trash trucks and how compactors destroy evidence. They saw the timeline of lies, the shifting statements, the missed opportunities. In June 2024, Judge Donald Knapp sentenced Brazier to 38 to 90 years in prison for the murder, plus 5 to 10 years for tampering, sentences to be served consecutively. During the hearing, the judge told him his actions showed cold indifference and self-absorbed conduct. He reminded the courtroom that Zion was a child who deserved a chance to grow up. But before that conviction ever came, Brazier had already been out once. In 2022, he was charged only with lying to investigators. He pleaded no contest, got 23 months to 4 years, and then walked out after barely 10 months, released in early 2023 through a special prison program meant for nonviolent offenders. When Kimberly learned he was free, she said it felt like losing my child all over again. She couldn't understand how someone who admitted to dumping her daughter's body was allowed to go home while her own child was still missing. Public reaction was furious. Community members marched, chanted Zion's name outside courthouses, and held vigils where her face glowed on candlelit posters. Local activists pointed out what Kimberly had been saying since the first night her daughter disappeared, that the system moved too slowly because Zion was black. From the start, her disappearance didn't trigger an Amber Alert. Police told Kimberly they needed to wait and see. The wait cost time. The landfill where her body was supposedly taken went on receiving tons of new waste every day, burying what might have been evidence under layer after layer of garbage and clay. When the murder trial began in 2024, prosecutors promised Kimberly they would finally say her daughter's name inside a courtroom. During closing arguments, Assistant Prosecutor Ryan Elsey turned to the jury and said, He got rid of her body because he murdered her. That is why people get rid of bodies. Period. Full stop. It was a single sentence that carried the weight of everything the family had lived through. After the verdict, Kimberly faced reporters with tears on her cheeks and strength in her voice. "You thought she didn't matter," she said, looking straight into the cameras. "You were mistaken entirely. She mattered. She was loved. She is still loved." Those words have echoed ever since. Kimberly has become one of Michigan's most persistent advocates for missing children. She has spoken at rallies, joined podcasts and news panels, and comforted other parents living her nightmare. When asked why she keeps speaking, she always gives the same answer: because someone has to keep saying her name. Her mission has grown larger than one case. She pushes lawmakers for faster response times when minors vanish, better cross-agency cooperation, and racial bias training for police and media. She partners with missing person advocacy groups, especially those focusing on missing Black girls, cases that statistically receive far less coverage than those of their white counterparts. Studies from the Black and Missing Foundation and the National Crime Information Center show that although Black children make up roughly 14% of the U.S. population, they represent nearly 37% of the country's missing minors. Yet their stories often fail to make national news. Kimberly calls that erasure after the disappearance. Every January, on the anniversary of Zion's last known day alive, the family holds a vigil in East Point. They light purple and white candles, Zion's favorite colors, and release balloons with her initials written in silver marker. Friends share stories about her laugh, her love for family, her quiet confidence. They talk about her plans to go to college, her passion for art, her kindness. At these gatherings, there's always a moment when Kimberly steps up to the microphone. The crowd quiets, the wind stills, and she says, "We haven't found her yet, but we haven't stopped. We will never stop." She reminds the crowd that justice is more than a prison sentence. It's recovery, it's recognition, it's reform. Reporters who cover the case note that her persistence keeps public attention alive. Detroit area newspapers still run periodic updates. True crime podcasts revisit the timeline, analyzing whether Brazier's story, that Zion collapsed while smoking marijuana, is even plausible. Medical experts called by prosecutors testified that sudden death from marijuana use in a healthy 17-year-old is virtually unheard of. The state argued that the collapse explanation was simply a lie to mask violence. But because there's no body, no autopsy, and no physical evidence of assault, the full truth may never be known. That is the agony of no-body homicides. They can end in conviction, but not in closure. For Kimberly, closure would mean bringing her daughter home, proper burial, place to visit, a headstone with her name carved into something that lasts longer than pain. She says that when she prays at night, she imagines Zion's spirit standing beside her, whispering that she's at peace, but she still wants her body found. Zion's case now appears in national conversations about missing person reform. Her photograph has been shown at conferences on racial disparity in policing, on panels hosted by the Black and Missing Foundation, and in university criminology courses studying how systemic bias affects search urgency. Community groups in Detroit have launched programs named after her, initiatives that focus on early reporting and digital awareness. Billboards bearing her face still appear along I-94 with the message, "Help bring Zion home." Every repost, every retelling, every whispered prayer keeps her story alive. Because memory is resistance. Silence is surrender. So as you watch this, ask yourself, what can we do? As neighbors, as parents, as citizens, to make sure Zion's story is never forgotten. We can speak her name. We can share her photo. We can remind the world that justice is not complete until every missing child, regardless of race or circumstance, is searched for with the same urgency. We can pressure local leaders to update missing person protocols, to expand public databases, to ensure every report triggers immediate action. We can volunteer with organizations that help families like Kimberly's. We can teach our children that empathy is power. Zion Foster should have had decades ahead of her. College, love, travel, laughter, mistakes, redemption, life. Instead, Her story became a mirror reflecting how easily some lives can vanish into indifference. But that's where we come in. Her mother keeps repeating the same 4 words, "Say her name, Zion," because every time we do, we remind the world that she mattered. It's been years since Zion Foster vanished, and still, there's no peace. The streets of East Point, Michigan, remember her. Her name is etched on posters that have long since faded, whispered at vigils lit by candles, carried in the quiet resolve of a mother who refuses to give up. Since Zion's disappearance, her mother, Kimberly D. Foster, has transformed grief into activism. No longer just a heartbroken parent, she's become a symbol of resistance, standing for every mother who has been ignored, dismissed, or forgotten when their child goes missing. She has spoken at public forums, stood before news cameras, and marched with other families who share the same unbearable silence. The kind of silence that settles when you don't even get a body to bury. Zion's story sparked something in Detroit. Community members began asking harder questions. Why wasn't there an Amber Alert? Why did it take a confession for her disappearance to be treated seriously? Why are Black girls like Zion so often the ones the system overlooks? Local activists, educators, and even artists joined the chorus. Murals of Zion appeared on abandoned buildings. Her face became a symbol, not just of loss, but of the urgent need for change. Social media continues to amplify her story. Hashtags like #JusticeForZion and #SayHerName resurface every few months, driven by people who refuse to let her memory fade into statistics. Her story has been featured on missing persons podcasts and online crime communities, where her mother continues to advocate for broader awareness. But it's not just about Zion anymore. Her name has become a rallying cry for all the other Black and brown girls who go missing without headlines. In many ways, she represents them. A 17-year-old girl whose dreams were stolen, and whose case exposed the cracks in a system that was never built to protect everyone equally. Jalen Brazier, the cousin who confessed to placing her in a dumpster, has been released. No murder charge. No justice that fits the scale of the loss. For many in the community, that release was a second wound. And still, Kimberly fights. She attends meetings, joins panels, keeps Zion's picture close. She says her daughter was light and love, and she's determined not to let that light be extinguished. Because somewhere out there, someone still knows something. Somewhere, Zion's body is waiting to be found. And until she is, her name will continue to echo, in Detroit, in Michigan, and far beyond. Do you believe community pressure makes a difference in long-term missing persons cases like Zion's? Let us know in the comments. If you believe in justice for Zion, if you believe her voice still deserves to be heard, then like this video, share her story, and subscribe. Let her name echo beyond Michigan, beyond time, beyond silence. Let her memory be louder than the system that failed her. And maybe one day, when someone new hears her name and decides to care, that echo will guide them to the truth.